Hello, everybody, and welcome to Uproot Reddit. Nowadays, it seems like a lot of people are getting married and finding their one true love. I mean, as long as your family isn't fully involved, like Reddit user Shy Girl Turned Sassy's experience titled, "My entitled relatives tried to force me to marry a man I had never met before." Here's the full story of what went down in this awkward setup. When I was 22, my extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., began asking me why I wasn't married yet. I spent my childhood and early 20s in a fairly conservative North Indian state, and people in those areas tend to be deeply misogynistic, and the only way a woman has any value in their eyes is if she's attached to a man. Her own accomplishments, talents, etc. are of no consequence. So it wasn't all that surprising when I began getting these ridiculous questions about marriage while I was still in college. I had recently lost a lot of weight, and for the first time I actually looked good in jeans. My weight loss seemed to cause their queries to reach whole new levels of idiocy. You see, they all assumed that the only reason I had lost weight was so I could land a husband. Surely I hadn't done it for the sake of my own health and well-being, or because I wanted to look good for myself. That would be preposterous. My aunt, about whom you've read in this post and this one, which were earlier posts that the Reddit user made, was friends with a matchmaker. Matchmakers in India are all these annoying middle-aged women who have nothing better to do than to go around carrying photographs and info about eligible bachelors and bachelorettes and share them with the families of young men and women who are looking to marry them off. My aunt's friend was no different. She showed my aunt a picture of some guy in his late 20s who also had a great job and was from a respectable family. Let's call this guy AJ. My aunt shared the picture and the info with my grandmother. Go read these posts to know exactly what kind of a person my grandmother was. My grandmother stole my clothes, and my grandmother made sure I stayed fat. Sounds to me like your grandmother was too heavily involved in your life. Between the two of them, they decided that AJ, whom I had never met before, would be the perfect match for me. Keep in mind that neither I nor my dad had any inkling of what was going on. One afternoon, I think it was Sunday, my aunt came over when I wasn't home. She told my dad to get his daughter dressed up and pretty because she had promised me to a guy and his parents were coming over to see me that very evening. The tone in which she spoke made it sound like she had done me and my dad a big favor. My dad was shocked and asked what in the world she was talking about. She told him she had taken it upon herself to find a groom for me without my knowledge or consent and taken some of the burden off his shoulders, and that their mother, my grandmother, had approved of the match. My dad told her he would have to speak to me first, and whether the guy's parents can come over or not depends on what I have to say about this. The little jerk actually tried to convince my dad that my consent wasn't necessary, and that as elders, they had every right to make this decision for me. But my dad wasn't having it. When I came home a few hours later, my aunt greeted me with a hug. This was enough to send red flags flying everywhere. I asked her what was going on, and she gleefully told me what she had done and how her proposition had my grandmother's blessings. I told her to shove it and that I was in no mood to have an arranged marriage. Not then, not ever. She looked shocked and asked how I could say such a thing after all the trouble she's been through in order to find such a wonderful young man for me. I decided to get dirty. I told her if the wonderful young man is making her so wet, why doesn't she go marry him? My dad heard this and told me to watch my language. I told him I would if this jerk knew her place and knew not to poke her nose where it doesn't belong. Is it me or is it getting really, really awkward in here? My grandmother had heard the commotion from her room and called out to my dad. She began telling him about how she had seen the guy's picture and the matchmaker had told them all about his family, and how a match like this may not come along again. My dad told her that he would never force his daughter to marry if she doesn't want to. My stepmom said the same. I merely told her she was insane and belongs in a lunatic asylum. This, of course, caused both Grand Monster and Crazy Aunt to fake cry and go on and on about how my dad doesn't trust them to make the right decision for his daughter, and that they were family and family has the right to make decisions for each other. What the actual freak, jerks? I wasn't going to budge, however, and told them I wasn't going to meet the guy or his parents, and Aunt better cancel the meeting if she knows what's good for her. Aunt left our house grumbling, but the drama was far from over. My Grand Monster, in order to emotionally blackmail my dad into agreeing to the match, with or without my consent, stopped eating. Anytime food was brought to her, she would break into crocodile tears and whine about how my dad was dishonoring her wishes. As she was diabetic, her health began to deteriorate. My dad was scared. One evening, he and my stepmom sat me down and asked if I would consider the proposal and just have a meeting with AJ's family. I was still adamant and said no. Grandma, don't you think you're going a little overboard there? Shy girl turned sassy continues. My aunt came over again and said she had great news, as AJ's parents were still interested in meeting me and they would allow me to study and have a career after I married their son. I asked her what part of the word no did she not understand the last time we spoke, and who do AJ's parents think they are to allow me to do anything? Aunt once again flew into an impotent rage and asked how I could be so selfish, how I could disobey my family like this, and some other junk about how marriage is a union between families and not just individuals, and how in her days girls were married off as soon as they reached adulthood, whether they liked it or not. I let her go on for some time, as her little hissy fit was quite amusing to me. After she had exhausted herself, I told her that if she or Grand Monster or even my parents even try to force me into this marriage, I was going to cut my wrist. And if I survived, the cops would know that I did it because I was being forced to marry against my will, and all involved would be in a world of trouble. Even if I died, I would leave behind enough evidence in the form of emails to all my friends and college professors detailing how I was being mentally tortured so I could be forced into this marriage. Both outcomes would result in all of them in deep legal trouble. I even showed them the email I had already written. All I had to do was send it. And if any of them even think of locking me up and taking away my phone, laptop, etc., they should remember that my vocal cords still work, and I would gather the entire neighborhood with my screams, and cops would surely be called. Okay, that escalated super quickly. As I spoke, my aunt's eyes kept getting wider and wider. She was in shock, but she knew me very well enough to know that I was very capable of doing all of this. She left quietly. Grand Monster must have heard every word because her hunger strike came to an end. My aunt never tried to look for a match for me again. Later, my dad told me that he was only asking me to think about the match and that he would never force me to do something I didn't want to do. I told him I knew that and assured him that my threats were only meant to scare my aunt. And they worked! Ooh boy, yeah, here's some dating advice. Never take relationship advice from overbearing relatives. And never allow your grandmother to go on a hunger strike basically because you wouldn't meet AJ or whoever he was. Good for you, shy girl turned sassy, for standing up for yourself. Well, that's all for today. We'll be back for more crazy Reddit stories right here on Uproot Reddit.